Welcome back. It is that time, August, my annual fantasy football video, where I go over pretty much everything. The players I love, the breakouts, the sleepers, bust, and I try to do it all in one video. I used to post like 5 separate videos, but I don't know. I'm going to put it all in one. I did that last year. I feel like it worked out pretty well, so I'll go with that. And yeah, this is one of my favorite videos to do every year. I'm definitely very much into fantasy football. I would say obsessed. And I've done a ton of research the past couple months. Have a lot of takes I want to, give out here. And last year, the video I did, it went okay, I would say for the most part. We did hit on some league winners. Amon-Ra St. Brown was in there. DJ Moore, David Montgomery, Zay Flowers was in there as well. There were some misses. I was in on Darren Waller. Should have known, but he did start out okay, but didn't end up well. Nick Chubb, that was pretty unfortunate. I called DeAndre Swift a bust, which was a bad take by me, and I called Deebo Samuel a bust. That was also a bad take, but you win some, you lose some. But enough reflecting on 2023. Let's get into 2024, and we'll start with the league winners. And sorry if I sound nasally. I've had a cold for like a week and a half. I don't know why it's not going away, but hopefully by next week or something I'll be good. Anyway, my first league winner for 2024, I don't go in any particular order, but I guess based on ADP, I guess I kind of went in that order. But I'm picking Isaiah Pacheco, the running back of the Kansas City Chiefs. And last year, he was the RB13, so he's already had an established role in the NFL. He's been good for the past couple of years. And I think KC not bringing back Jerick McKinnon is going to be huge for this guy. McKinnon's a bit older, of course, and I don't think anybody signed him yet. But McKinnon did have a big receiving role for this team. He did play a lot in the games where Pacheco was out last year, and he had a big game against New England, I remember, when in the fantasy playoffs last year. But for Pacheco, he already had 44 receptions last year. He can catch the football, and without McKinnon on the roster now, that may be 50 plus. I know the Chiefs got more pass catchers, of course, Worthy and Marquise Brown, but I do think he can get 50 plus catches. It seems like based on what Andy Reid has said so far in this, off-season, training camp, preseason, that they are totally comfortable with Isaiah Pacheco being a 3-down back. And as a fantasy manager, you love hearing that. There is the Clyde Edwards-Helaire situation where he's kind of battling some PTSD. So, of course, hopefully he's okay. But I don't know what his availability is going to be once the season starts. And behind him on the depth chart is not much. You have Deneric Prince, Keontae Ingram, guys like that. I'm really not that concerned about guys like that. Kansas City has the 7th ranked offensive line on PFF heading into 2024. So you have a really good offensive line. They just signed Creed Humphrey to like the biggest center contract in football. So you have a great offensive line, of course, a great quarterback, a team that's constantly going to be putting up points and in the red zone. And I personally believe that the Chiefs' offense is going to bounce back this year. There will be a lot of goal line opportunities for Isaiah Pacheco. You love that, of course. They should be ahead in a lot of games. There won't be many stacked boxes, of course. I think unless he injures that shoulder, of course, Pacheco has that shoulder issue. If he can stay away from that, I think he's a pretty safe bet to be a really good running back this year. I would say a top 10 running back. I think the potential for 12 to 15 touchdowns is there. As I mentioned, 50 plus receptions, over 1,000 rushing yards. So I think that's all there for him. I would say nobody's safe. I hate saying people are safe, but I do like his opportunity this year. I love the team he's on and the track record. He's entering his 3rd year. Time for him to get his first big contract soon. So he's kind of in a contract year, not exactly, but somewhat. So a lot to play for him this year. So I'm picking Pacheco for my number 1 league winner. Breakout number 2, or league winner, I keep saying breakout, but league winner number 2 is Drake London, wide receiver of the Atlanta Falcons. And it seems like all offseason that Drake London has said a bunch of great things about Kirk Cousins and vice versa. I think these guys are not in love with each other. That'd be weird to say, but they love each other from a football standpoint. I think these two are very good for each other. We have seen Kirk Cousins support numerous really good fantasy wide receivers, going from Stephon Diggs to Adam Thielen to Justin Jefferson, Jordan Addison, probably even in Washington with Deshaun Jackson and like maybe Pierre Garçon. Jordan Reed had some good moments with Kirk as well. He has supported fantasy wide receivers for a long time. I know Reed was a tight end, but you get the point. Atlanta has a lot of guys I like. Bijan is like a top 3 pick for me this year, and I would say Drake London excites me as well. The one guy I'm kind of out on is Kyle Pitts. I could see where it works, but I just don't want to be fooled again. I'm just not totally sold on it, and there's a few other tight ends I'd rather have than him, but that's a different topic for a different day. By the way, I might make another fantasy video of talking about players that are kind of not controversial, but guys that are polarizing. Guys like Kyle Pitts, guys like Devon Achane, guys like that. So if you guys want that video, let me know. I would definitely love to give takes about that stuff. But anyway, I could see a scenario where Drake London has 140 targets this year, maybe even 150, and he's going to be the clear number 1 guy. I mentioned Kyle Pitts, and he is going to get his targets as well, but from a wide receiver standpoint, they don't really have much else on that team. I do like Darnell Mooney. We'll talk about him later, but he is Darnell Mooney. Like the one guy that is the set in stone wide receiver 1 alpha, that is Drake London. And I know he's not the best at separating, but when you're talking about at the catch point and using your body to just get open and make tough catches, Drake London's as good as anybody. And this is by far the best quarterback he's had in the NFL. So I'm looking forward to this opportunity for Drake London. I forgot if I mentioned this or not, but Rondale Moore's out for the year. He plays a different role, but with Rondale Moore gone, it's probably going to be more targets for Drake London. So I could easily see a season of 80-plus catches, 1,200 yards, double-digit touchdowns, and he could be the next guy that Kirk Cousins supports as a wide receiver 1. So it's year 3 for Drake London as well, just like Pacheco. You know, once again, not a contract year per se, but going into year 3 is definitely a huge year for a contract in the future. If Drake London puts up massive numbers, he might get that big extension in the offseason of 2025. So I think he puts up great numbers this year, and he's definitely fine as a wide receiver 1 for me. League winner number 3 for me. This guy is polarizing as well, but we're talking about him now in a positive way. It's Derrick Henry. So Derrick Henry is a guy who, for the past 2 years, I've been a fan of. He came off that season in 2021 where he broke that bone in his foot and he missed the second half of the year. He came back for the playoffs but wasn't too effective. But in 2022, he was great. I believe he led the league in rushing. He played last year, had about 1,100 yards and double-digit touchdowns again. So his numbers have been declining, quote-unquote, but he went from like 2,000 yards to 1,500 to 1,100. So in that sense, he's declining, but it's not like he went from 1,500 yards to 600 last year or something very concerning. So I know he's 30 years old now, and it's a concern for running backs, obviously, once you're over like 27. But Derrick Henry's not your typical guy. He has like this crazy diet he follows, and he takes care of himself probably as well as any professional athlete there is. So I'm really not that concerned. This is a big year for him. He's had moments in Tennessee where they've had good teams, of course, and I think the Titans went to a couple divisional rounds with him there. But this is like the first time he's on an elite team, quote unquote. So I think he's excited for this. And even with all the dysfunction that the Titans had last year on their offense with Andre Dillard at left tackle, I just made a video about them. I talked about Will Levis the other day. But they arguably had the worst offensive line in football, probably a worse pass blocking offensive line, but even run blocking wise, they were not good either. So he now goes to the best situation of his entire career and gets to play with an amazing dual threat quarterback. The next best quarterback that's a dual threat that Derrick Henry's played with is probably like Marcus Mariota, or maybe it was Will Levis for a bit last year. Maybe Tannehill. Like Tannehill kind of low-key ran a bit, but still, it's not Lamar Jackson is what I'm getting at. So I love to have running backs next to these rushing quarterbacks that defenses are afraid of. It's a reason I really am a fan of Jonathan Taylor this year, because teams are going to be really scared of Anthony Richardson. It just opens up more lanes, and it just gives Derrick Henry more room to operate. I would almost be surprised if Derrick Henry didn't score 15 or more touchdowns this year. That might be quite the take, but I think they're going to have a lot of goal line opportunities. Lamar's going to steal some of them, but it's not like the Ravens do the whole tush-push thing. I think that once they get to the goal line, it's going to be Derrick Henry, the first 2 downs at least, and they're going to give him a chance to get in there. And I think if they have an offensive season like last year, which they should, they get Mark Andrews back and they're getting healthy. They got Devontae Walker out of North Carolina. I liked him, the receiver. So I think this offense is going to be good, and you could make some comparisons to other situations in the past. I remember in 2013 when the Falcons got Steven Jackson, who of course spent his whole career with the St. Louis Rams. And Jackson went to Atlanta, and he was surrounded by Julio and Roddy White, and Matt Ryan, Tony Gonzalez, and people were like, oh shit, like this is a great pick. And Steven Jackson sucked that year, all right? It was the end of the road. So there is the chance that, yes, maybe that happens. But I think kind of like the Vince Carter meme, I think he has one more in him. I really do think he has one more in him. I think Derrick Henry, for one last time in 2024 here, gives us a season of being a top 10 running back, and could potentially win people leagues taking him in round 2 or sometimes even round 3, maybe round 4. I really have no problem taking him in round 2, even in a PPR league. I think the touchdowns will definitely kind of up his value. You would prefer a pass catcher, but when you're scoring what I think will be around 15 touchdowns, catching 50-plus passes is not the biggest deal in the world. So I think he will definitely be fine. He'll rush for around 1,200 yards. I think 15 touchdowns once again. He'll have his 20, 25 catches or so, but like, he doesn't need it is what I'm saying. So Derrick Henry, especially in a half PPR standard league, of course, I would take him arguably in the back end of the first round. But Derrick Henry, definitely a very solid second round pick that I am not scared of this year. Number 4, league winner. The homer is doing it again. I'm a homer, I guess, but I'm taking Malik Neighbors. Malik Neighbors is a guy that I really want to get this year. I know I said it off the top of the video. I picked Darren Waller last year as a breakout or a league winner. It was horrible. But this is a different case. This guy's about 10 years younger. He's a rookie. There are no other targets in town. I'm a big fan of Malik Neighbors. And honestly, due to the Daniel Jones looking awful in preseason thing, and he had a bit of an ankle injury a couple weeks ago, Malik Neighbors' value has kind of dropped. It was really like skyrocketing at one point, but I feel like he's kind of plateaued in the 4th round or so. You may have to take him in round 3, depending on the platform you play on. I play a lot of Yahoo, and he's like a back of the 3rd round pick in a 12-team league. So if you want to get him, you may have to take him in round 3, which I'd rather get him in round 4. But if I'm on the board and certain guys that I want are gone and it's Malik Neighbors, or take a guy like, I don't know, like a Mike Evans, not a Mike Evans. I think Mike Evans is a bit better, but who's a receiver in that area? Like a Jalen Waddle. Like I'd rather take Malik Neighbors. So Malik Neighbors, I understand, does not have a great quarterback situation, but the quarterback-needy Giants felt so good about Malik Neighbors, they took him 6th overall. And even before the Giants were rumored to get him, when I first watched Malik Neighbors, I fell in love. I was like, this guy is electric. He has a different gear than anybody else. He is explosive, and it's really not that comparable. He's more explosive than any other receiver that I saw in this class. And I always had the take that I think arguably he's better than Marvin Harrison Jr., and we'll see how their careers play out. But I've always been a big fan of Malik Neighbors, and the landing spot could have been better, of course, but even with the Giants, there is no clear alpha in their receiving room. Now there is. It is Malik Neighbors, of course, and I could see a world where he gets 150-plus targets this year. And you know, of course, barring injury, which, of course, when you are targeted that much, there is more room for you to get injured. But if he stays healthy, which hopefully he does, because I think he could put up a very special rookie season, whether it is Daniel Jones or Drew Lock. They have other targets there, of course, in New York, but nobody that's going to command the ball as much as this guy is, obviously. Wan'Dale Robinson, Jalen Hyatt's a deep threat for the most part. You have Darius Slayton, who is a candidate to be traded at the deadline, so that could happen as well. But he's one of the more explosive receivers in the NFL right now before even playing an actual game. And if you can get him in round 4, I think that's probably the latest you're going to get him for the next 8 to 10 years. Like, this guy's going to be one of the better receivers in football. He's going to be a 1st or 2nd round pick for the next, as I said, 8-10 years or so, in my opinion. So once again, I don't love Daniel Jones. I've said it a billion times on this channel. Not a fan of his, but still, I think doesn't matter who the targets are. He's going to get the targets. They're going to force feed him the ball. And I think, once again, 150-plus targets is definitely possible. And when you get a guy that many targets that's this talented, good stuff should happen. So I could definitely see a great rookie season for Neighbors. It may not result in a lot of wins for the Giants, but from a fantasy standpoint, I think Neighbors is going to be great. Number 5, another polarizing player here. He played last night in preseason, and it was a pretty up and down game, I guess, for the most part. But Anthony Richardson, a guy that I probably hyped up here last year, And it was going so well, too. It really was. I was so disappointed. I took Richardson in like every league I was in last year. I'm in like 4 or 5 leagues. I probably had him in every league but one. And it was going so well. He was putting up big numbers. He kept getting hurt like mid-game. He came out a couple games, of course. But in the games he finished last year, he was so damn good. So I went back and watched his season last year, and I was like, I have to take this guy. He's just one of those guys that can break fantasy if things go right. And we have great quarterbacks. I'm a big fan of Jalen Hurts this year. Of course, Josh Allen might have to play like a Superman role this year and do a lot himself, which is great for fantasy. But I think Anthony Richardson, a guy who's going a bit later than those guys, and playing in this Shane Steichen offense and having a lot to prove in year 2, I'm looking forward to it. So last year, Richardson, in the 2 full games he played, had 21.9 and 29.6 fantasy points. He left after 1 quarter versus the Texans and still scored 17 fantasy points in 1 quarter. So that's pretty impressive. He got injured in week 5 last year, ended his season. And there were concerns over the offseason of like, well, is Richardson going to dial it back? Can they still have him run as much as they do? And Shane Steichen, the Colts head coach, had a line that you love to hear. He basically said, we can't tell Anthony not to run. That's like telling Steph Curry not to shoot the ball. And I'm like, oh, all right, that's all I need to hear. That is great to hear. So Richardson is still going to run a lot. The Colts understand that's one of the things that makes Richardson like such a great prospect, is that he can run the ball and like run people over and break off big plays and be a battering ram at the goal line. And if you extrapolate his season last year, where it was the 2 healthy games, and put it over a 16-game season, so you take 1 game away. So if you put those 2 healthy games last year over a 16-game season, he would have 3,300 passing yards, 24 passing touchdowns, 16 rushing touchdowns. That seems like unsustainable, but you never know. And the Colts play at a fast pace on offense for the most part. That's what they want to do. They were 12th in pace last year, which is not... It's not like top 10, of course, but it's pretty good. It's above average, and I think if Richardson's healthy, they're going to be top 10 for sure. So a full season of Richardson can win people fantasy championships. For the most part, I don't love taking quarterbacks early, obviously, but if you prefer waiting on a Kyler Murray or a Caleb Williams or somebody else I'm going to mention later, then do that. But if you're in like round 5 or something and Richardson's sitting there, I mean, I think it's worth a shot. I really do. I love taking players that can like not single-handedly. It's a team effort in fantasy football, but single-handedly in a way at their position, outscore everybody else by a lot. Kind of the way that Christian McCaffrey did it last year. Like you look at the running back results from last year, 2023 scoring, it's like Christian McCaffrey, then a giant gap, and then the second guy. It's like, he outscored his position by so much. So if things break right for Richardson and he gets like the 25 passing touchdowns and the 10 plus rushing touchdowns and he passes for about 3,500 passing yards, he's going to have a fantastic year for fantasy. So I think it's worth taking a shot on. I'm going to take him in a few leagues for sure this year. If he gets hurt again, then so be it. I know the risk I'm getting into here, but the upside is so high, and I want to have him. Number 6 league winner for me is George Pickens with no Brandon Ayuk. And I will say, as a disclaimer, if Brandon Ayuk is a Pittsburgh Steeler by the time you're watching this video, just skip this part because I will take him out. But right now, it seems like Ayuk will not be a Steeler. It seems like George Pickens will be the number 1 receiver in Pittsburgh by a lot. And I think it's a similar situation to Malik Neighbors, where it's like you have this one receiver who is obviously much better than everybody else in his receiving core, and he should get a lot of targets. Now, I do think Neighbors will get more targets because Pittsburgh, especially with Arthur Smith, they will be more run-heavy, so that kind of sucks. But he should still get 120, 130 targets or so. And a guy like George Pickens, he can change his entire day off one catch. I mean, we've seen it time and time again. He'll catch a slant, take it 60 yards, and boom, there's his fantasy day right there in one catch. So he's not a guy who needs a ton of volume to be great. And last year, looking at the Falcons offense, which of course is where Arthur Smith was coaching last year, Drake London averaged over 7 targets per game after week 1. Of course, he had that 0 catch week 1 last year, but 7+ targets a game, and that's with Desmond Ridder and Taylor Heineke. So with Pickens now, you're going to have around 7 targets a game from Justin Fields or Russell Wilson, who I think are fine. They're competent enough. We saw Cortland Sutton had a good year with Russ last year. Obviously, DJ Moore was fantastic last year with Justin Fields. So, I mean, I know those quarterbacks aren't great, but they're good enough at this point to support a wide receiver. We saw the way Pickens closed out the season last year. If you had him in fantasy football last year, he might have won you your league. He had that 33-point game in the semifinals last year. And Pittsburgh did trade Deontay Johnson in the offseason. So, as I said, the target competition is not there. I think the Steelers' wide receiver 2 is like Van Jefferson. I mean, like, come on. So this guy is by far the wide receiver 1. And in 4 games without Deontay Johnson last year in Pittsburgh when he was hurt, I believe it was a hamstring for him, Pickens averaged 14 half-point PPR points per game, including 2 games over 20 fantasy points. So without Deontay there last year, he was averaging 14 fantasy points per game. He had a couple of like not league winning, but week winning type of weeks. And I do wish he was more consistent, and maybe this year he will be, as by far the number 1 guy. But I do love players that can single-handedly win you a week, and it seems like George Pickens can be one of those guys, especially with more targets this year. And I think this Pittsburgh quarterback room is upgraded. I know it's kind of like, it's not upgraded by a lot, but Kenny Pickett was not that great. So to go from Kenny Pickett, and Mason Rudolph looked okay, but to go from those guys to what they have now, it's an upgrade. So I think George Pickens, based on his explosiveness and getting more targets, he's a guy I'm targeting this year, and he definitely could be a guy who wins you multiple weeks. Next league winner for me, number 7, is Trey McBride. So McBride's another guy who probably won a lot of people fantasy championships last year. I picked him up in a couple leagues, and it was amazing. He was getting 8 to 10 catches a week, probably 80-plus yards every week, it felt like, some touchdowns sprinkled in there. He was tremendous. So after Zach Ertz got traded in week 7 last year, from weeks 8 through 18, McBride was finally made the tight end 1 for the Cardinals, got full playing time. He averaged 6 catches and 65 yards per game. His final 10 games of 2023 over a full season would have been 106 catches, 1,048 yards, and 5 touchdowns over 16 games. Obviously, the 5 touchdowns, not ideal, but there's a lot of variance and bad luck with that stuff, so it is what it is. But the catches, the volume, the yards, that stuff is repeatable. And I know that they added Marvin Harrison Jr. in the draft, which may be looked at as a bad thing for a Trey McBride, but I'm not really that concerned about it. I think that's a guy in Harrison that can occupy a team's best corner and safety help over the top, and it gives McBride this room underneath to operate and pick up those tough yards. There are so many times where McBride will catch a short hitch for 5 yards and then turn his body and drag a couple defenders and pick up 8 yards. Like, that's what he does. He's a beast after the catch. He's probably not going to rip off a 70-yard touchdown or something like that, but in terms of just general yards after the catch for a tight end, I think he's very good. He just does not go down on first contact usually. And if you play in a full PPR league especially, he's a must-have guy. I think he's probably a lock for 75, 80 catches, maybe more. Talent does matter, of course, and I think McBride's very talented. He finally got the opportunity last year. He was really good. The Cardinals' defense is probably going to be atrocious this year, so that's good for a passing game script for the Arizona Cardinals offense. So McBride seems like a really good tight end this year. And in my opinion, I don't know if I did actual rankings myself, but I think for tight ends, like, Trey McBride might be a top 3 guy. Like, I'd rather have him than Travis Kelce. I'd rather have McBride than Sam Laporta. And I might be forgetting somebody else. So for me, McBride is a must-have this year, especially for PPR. The number 8 league winner for me is Deontay Johnson, wide receiver of now the Carolina Panthers. I mentioned him before talking about George Pickens. So I like this. Pickens gets more targets in Pittsburgh. You put Deontay in Carolina. He should get a bunch of targets there. Deontay, just like McBride, one of those guys that if you play in a full PPR, which I tend to play in more times than not, that's a guy I want. I think I think that Deontay Johnson is, assuming health for him and for Bryce Young, I think he's a lock for 90 catches. And it could even be 100. I would not be surprised. We saw last year what Adam freaking Thielen did for this team last year. Adam Thielen was actually kind of good, really good the first half of the year, fell off as many people expected, but finished the year as the wide receiver 19 for Adam Thielen, who was an afterthought at this time last year. And the Panthers went out of their way to trade for Deontay Johnson. It's a contract year for him, which is always a bonus when targeting players. And he is a tremendous route runner. Not the best hands, of course, but a tremendous route runner. One of the best players at getting open. He's bound to be the number one target on this team. They did draft Xavier Legette in the second round. He's still a rookie. I do like his game, but he's a rookie, and I don't know what to expect. And Thielen's still there. He's 34 now. And he did fall off once again in the second half of last year. So it's going to be the Deontay Johnson show. This is not a good team. They should be playing from behind more times than not. They brought in Dave Canales as their head coach. He did so many great things for Geno Smith in Seattle in 2022. Then last year in Tampa, he was great for Baker Mayfield in 2023. So if Bryce Young has this breakout year 2 or even looks better than he did last year, then imagine what Deontay Johnson as the wide receiver 1 in this offense can do. And even at worst, if Bryce Young stays the same as he was last year, you still may get a great season out of Deontay Johnson. Like we saw Adam Thielen do it last year. So he feels like a guy who's going to have 90 to 100 catches, over 1,000 yards, maybe only 4 to 5 touchdowns. He's not really a touchdown type of guy, but a real chance to have a 25-30% target share in this offense. So as I said, he may drop some balls. He's not going to be a 10-touchdown guy, but a guy who I think is a safe bet for close to 100 grabs and over 1,000 yards, and you probably get him in around 5, 6, 7. So once again, a full PPR, definitely got to take Deontay Johnson. Number 9, league winner for me is Rasheed Rice, wide receiver of the Kansas City Chiefs. And when drafts were happening a few months ago, the perception was he would be suspended for about 4 to 6 games, maybe even more. But right now, as we sit here today, just a couple weeks before the actual season, it seems like a suspension's not going to happen. I feel like we're going to get a full 17 games of Rasheed Rice, no suspension. And if it happens, it might not happen until next year or maybe very late in the season this year. So to start out the year, Rice is going to be a full-time player. We saw this in the preseason. He's playing a lot. And last year, only playing 58% of the snaps offensively for the Chiefs. Played more, of course, as the year went on. But he had 79 catches, 938 yards, and 7 touchdowns last year. In his final 11 regular season games, when the playing time picked up, his 16-game pace was 90 catches, 1,100 yards, and 8 touchdowns. So I understand, of course, that the Chiefs brought in guys, I mentioned this earlier. For Worthy, he's a rookie, a deep threat, of course, and Marquise Brown has this shoulder injury that might keep him out a couple weeks early. So I do think Rice has a chance from the get-go to be the wide receiver 1. He's a guy that Patrick Mahomes trusts, and that's a big thing. Of course, Mahomes is as good as it gets, and from week 6 to 17 last year, Rice was the wide receiver 13. Like, he was right there from being a wide receiver 1, one spot away. And Rice's average draft position on some platforms is ridiculous. And I do think as the last couple weeks have gone on and the preseason's gone on, his draft position has been a bit higher where it should be, but it's still not exactly where it should be. Like, I think if there was no suspension early on, this guy might have been a 3rd or a 4th round pick. You can get Rice in the 5th or 6th round in a lot of drafts now. So he's a guy who in some drafts is going in the top 60, sometimes in the 70s, and he's another guy who probably benefits from PPR. As I said, like his 16-game pace from his final 11 games last year would have given him 90 catches, so obviously a PPR guy. But even without PPR, I could see him having a nice touchdown total, 8 or 9 touchdowns, maybe 10, and a lot of yards. So he's a really good yards after catch guy, breaks tackles, he's pretty shifty, and I'm not that scared of Hollywood Brown. I'm really not, especially with the injury now and Xavier Worthy once again. Is he worthy of targets? That's a bad joke, my bad. But still, I still think that he's the wide receiver 1. I know Kelsey's there, of course, but I'm personally not that high on Kelsey this year. He is what he is at this point. He's probably going to have 80 catches, 800, 900 yards, but I think Rasheed Rice might be the most talented receiver on this team, and for where he's going in the drafts, it just doesn't add up, and you can definitely take advantage of that low draft cost based on a suspension that's probably not going to happen, at least until next year. The final league winner for me is quarterback Jaden Daniels, rookie for the Washington Commanders. Now, did you know that Cliff Kingsbury, who's now the OC for Washington, when he had Kyler Murray during his rookie year, Kyler Murray finished as the quarterback 7 with Cliff Kingsbury calling plays. And I know Kingsbury has a bad rap around the league, and it probably makes sense, but the preseason clips on Jaden Daniels are amazing. We saw the quarterback keeper, a rushing touchdown versus the Jets, and it sucks for people like myself who wanted Daniels in round like 8 or 9 because the draft price is definitely going up. You may have to take him in round 6 or 7 now, which I still think is fine because this guy has a chance to be I'll just say it, he has a chance to be a top 5 or 6 quarterback. As I said, Kyler Murray in this same offense, I know it was 2019, we're going back 5 years, but he was a quarterback 7. And I think Jaden Daniels, based on his rushing ability, which last season at LSU, he had 1,100 rushing yards, 10 rushing touchdowns, and that would have alone, based on rushing, put him at 170 fantasy points. So to put that in perspective, he would have been like the running back 13 last year, just based on rushing. And the guy happens to play quarterback, and he throws the ball very well. So there probably will be a real life learning curve for Jaden Daniels, but in fantasy, he should be a stud from day one. A guy who is going to get probably 5, 6, 7, 8 points alone just based on rushing. That's without the passing coming into the equation. So I would take him over guys like Dak or Jordan Love or Joe Burrow or Brock Purdy. Those are more boring options. I mean, Jordan Love is not as boring because he is still relatively new and he may even be better this year. But for guys like Dak especially, who the weapons are not looking that great, especially with CeeDee Lamb not at practice yet, and Joe Burrow has to be so efficient as a passer, has to have passing touchdowns, like a bunch of them, to be like, the thing is, Jaden Daniels can probably throw for 22 touchdowns and Joe Burrow can throw for 35, and Jaden Daniels will probably still outscore him because of the rushing. So I'm really not that into the pure pocket passing quarterbacks in fantasy at this point in time. That's been known for a while now. But for Jaden Daniels, this is a guy who has a chance to be great for fantasy football. So I would take advantage. Take him in around 6, 7, or 8. 7 or 8 would be amazing. So if he's your quarterback 1, you're looking fine. He's a top 10 quarterback in my opinion. So definitely love Jaden Daniels this year. All right, no more being nice. It's time to go over guys that I think are going to be bust or overvalued and guys I'm just straight up avoiding. I mean, everybody's different. Of course, you can take anybody at any cost. Like, for example, the first guy on the list, I would definitely take him at a certain cost. But based on where he's going, I'm not taking him. First guy is Kiron Williams, running back of the Los Angeles Rams. Average draft position is 15th overall. And people tend to forget that Kiron Williams missed 4 games in the middle of the season last year because he started out so well. Then he came back. He won people championships, which is great. And last year was fun. You were probably able to get him as a free agent pickup after week 1. And as I said, he might have won you a fantasy championship last year. But I just have a bad feeling about him. And I think mainly it's due to injuries. If you guaranteed me he was going to play every game this year, I'd probably be a big fan of Kiron Williams. But since 2022, the guy's had 5 injuries listed: a foot fracture, 2 separate high ankle sprains, a fractured hand in the playoffs last year, a strained hip that he played through. And he's not that big. He's 5'9", 194, which is like my size, but he probably has a lot more muscle, obviously. But still, it's not that big of a running back. And I see the upside. It's a Sean McVay running back, and Sean McVay running backs tend to be great. And McVay likes to lean on one guy. He made, C.J. Anderson a viable option for a bit. He made Darrell Henderson a good option for a bit. Like, he's made running backs look good. But a guy like Blake Corm, who's the backup, I would absolutely take him because I really do think there's a chance that Kiron misses time this year and Corm is bigger and more durable, and I think Corm might be the highest upside handcuff in the NFL this year, or in fantasy this year. So I would definitely take Corm. I just don't trust Kiron to stay healthy for a full season. If he proves me wrong, that's great. You know, you don't want to wish injuries on guys, but you just got to be realistic, and I just don't see this playing out too well, and I don't see him playing a whole, 17-game season. My next overvalued player is Devonte Adams, wide receiver for the Las Vegas Raiders. ADP is 18th overall. So I wouldn't call him a straight-up bust. I do think Adams will have value this year and probably be like a wide receiver too, maybe on the lower end. But he's 31 now, and this might be the worst quarterback situation of his career. Could have been last year with Jimmy G, but at least Jimmy G's been established and has some track record. Gardner Minshew, last year was pretty impressive given the situation. He did make Michael Pittman look pretty good, or maybe vice versa, but still, I just don't like this situation. I still think Devontae's a good player, but this whole Raiders situation with the run-heavy approach and them wanting to give Zamir White a lot of carries, and they want to give the running backs a large workload, which I don't expect the Raiders to be a good team. So good luck with that whole thing. Their own head coach, Antonio Pierce, even pretty much said that our offense is not that good. He said we're probably not going to be, to be honest, a juggernaut offense. To say that about your team as a head coach is pretty crazy, but it does show you that, this Raiders offense is probably going to suck, and I don't really want to be attached to it. I really have no interest in any Raiders players this year. I think Zamir White is overvalued and just a very obvious, I think I have him later on this list actually, so I don't want to talk about him too much, but we'll get to him. So I see the argument for him, and that Adams might see 30% of this team's targets, and once again, Michael Pittman was a good receiver with Minshew last year, but I just do not like this Raiders team, and now at 31 years old, you have to wonder, when is the Devonte Adams fall off going to happen? Could it be due to injuries? Is he not going to be the same guy he usually is? I don't know. I do think the targets will be there, but at this age and at this price, I just think there are way more exciting options to get than Devonte Adams. You can get Chris Olave. You can get Drake London. You can get, hell, I'll take Malik Neighbors over Devonte Adams. I know the price range is different, but I'm trying not to draft so hard off ADP this year. In my mind, I think Malik Neighbors is the better option this year. So if I'm on the draft board and it's Neighbors or Devonte Adams, I'm not going to say, oh, Adams is ranked so much higher. I don't care. I'm taking Neighbors this year. So, could be wrong, of course, but I'm just not a fan of Adams this season. The number 3 overvalued player for me, and this has a chance to go very wrong, so I get that coming into it, but Nico Collins, ADP 29th overall, and he'll have his decent game. Not decent. He'll have his great games. He'll have his 3-4 games this year where he has 25 points or something and he looks great, but I just think he's going too high. He's going as the wide receiver 14 now for a guy who has 2 other great receivers on his team, and it took him a while to break out. It took 3 seasons, and he does have an injury history, and there's a lot of red flags for me. The consistency is going to be an issue once again. He had 3 games last year over 24 fantasy points, which is great. It gives you the upside you want, but there were also 4 games he was under 6 half-point PPR fantasy points. And we also ignore the injury history for a guy like him, kind of like Kiron. Kiron and Nico, the injuries really don't get brought up with these guys, and he's avoided the catastrophic injury, which is great, but in 2022, he missed 7 games with a groin strain and then a foot sprain. Last season, he missed 2 games with a calf strain, so a lot of sprains and strains going on. Don't like that, of course, and there's receivers going behind him that I would take instead of him. I would take Jalen Waddle before him. I would take Michael Pittman before him. I would take Cooper Kupp, Metcalf, DJ Moore, Malik Neighbors, obviously, and maybe even Stephon Diggs, depending on how crazy I'm feeling that day. So I'm not a big Nico Collins guy. I just think it's too inconsistent. There's too many other targets, and I just don't really trust him to stay healthy either. So if he fell to round 4, I'd probably take him there, but for round 2 especially, even round 3, I think there are just other better options that I would take over Nico Collins. The next overdrafted player, in my opinion, is Rashad White, which hurts because I loved this guy last year. I hyped him up last year. His ADP's 31st overall, by the way. I just think this year is going to be way different for him. Last year, he benefited because he saw so many touches. There was no competition in that backfield. You had a better offense than I think the Buccaneers will have this year. I expect some Buccaneers offense regression in 2024. And Dave Canales leaving's big, and the Bucs taking Bucky Irving in round 4 in the draft in April is also big. So in 2023, Rashad White in total played the most snaps of any running back in football last year. Not CMC, not Derrick Henry, not Brees, not Bijan. It was Rashad White. And percentage-wise, he was the 4th running back in percent of running back snaps, only behind McCaffrey, Kiron, and Saquon Barkley. I just don't see that happening again. He should have a steady and healthy, number of snaps every game, but now you have a competent backup in Bucky Irving who looks good in the preseason. I don't expect Rashad White to lose his job. That's not going to happen. But I don't see the workload being the immense amount that it was last year. Last year for the Bucs, Chase Edmonds missed a good amount of time. That helped Rashad White. Sean Tucker wasn't that good, the undrafted free agent, and Keyshawn Vaughn is Keyshawn Vaughn. So it didn't really work out for his backups, and everything broke right for Rashad White last year. This year, though, I just don't see it being the case. It's going to be a playing time thing. He's not the most efficient runner throughout his career. That's a big thing as well. So I just think he was a guy who benefited so much off of volume last year. This year he has to trade some of that volume for more efficiency, and I haven't seen anything out of Rashad White that makes me think all of a sudden he's going to be a better runner or more efficient runner. Maybe he is. This is year 3 now for him, so I could be wrong. But I just don't see it being as great as it was last year, and therefore I think him being drafted 31st overall is just too high. Number 5, and this guy I have no problem calling a bust. I do not like him at all this year. RaAndre Stevenson, running back for the Patriots. ADP is 59 overall. And I've loved RaAndre the past couple years because he had the check down god Mac Jones throwing the ball to him. So in any PPR league, it was great. RaAndre Stevenson, it was like, hey, let me get this swing pass and let me get another swing pass and then another. It was like 5-6 catches a week, it felt like, on just some check downs and swing passes. This time, though, there is no Mac Jones. He's now backing up in Jacksonville. So you can't really get the crazy amount of catches that he was getting in the past. So RaAndre Stevenson has to be an efficient in-between-the-tackles runner on a team that stinks, and I just don't see that being the case. It's going to be Drake May or Jacoby Brissett. It feels like Drake May's picked up a lot of steam, so maybe it will be him week 1, but I'm not expecting the same thing. And to make matters worse, the Patriots signed Antonio Gibson in the offseason, who is supposed to be a third down back, of course, a former receiver in college. So you would think that's going to be his third down role. And I know Stevenson just got the extension, but I just don't see how he overcomes this bad situation that may have less playing time than it has in the past. And he's also coming off that nasty high ankle sprain last year, which I had RaAndre last year, and it really killed my teams, so that was terrible. But he might have lost some explosiveness off of that. You never know. He's still pretty young. He's like 25. But you never know. So the offensive line projects to be an issue as well. I just don't think it's a favorable situation at all, and I am concerned about it. So RaAndre Stevenson, unless he falls really far, which he probably won't, I'm just not going to draft him this year. The next player on the overdrafted list, and I would say maybe even a bust this year, is Keenan Allen. I feel bad saying it. His ADP is 66, by the way. I feel bad saying it because I feel like for the past 5 years, I've been a big Keenan Allen fan. I feel like I hyped him up last year, too. And he was great last year until he got hurt towards the end. But he's now 32 years old. He's on a new team. There's these rumors that his weight is a little high, and it's just somebody that I'm not interested in at all this year. I'm not crazy about any of the 3 Bears wide receivers this year. If I had to rank it based on value, I would say Odunze, then Moore, and then Allen. Of course, I would take Moore first in a vacuum, but based on value, I think Odunze is the most interesting. But Keenan Allen for me is a distant third in that group, and I just don't really want him at all. The injuries, after being pretty injury-free for about 4 or 5 years, the injuries are creeping back up. He had the hamstring in 22. He missed some games last year with the heel and the shoulder that kept him out for 4 games. And maybe he'll be fine, and maybe he'll be Caleb Williams' first target, which I don't see happening. It's always possible. But, people that watch the Bears are saying that he looks slow, he looks kind of big, and now at this age, I'm not sure. Like, I think ADP 66 is a fair price. It's not anything outrageous, but there's just other guys in this area that I'm a bigger fan of. Like, for instance, I think It may be crazy to say now, but I would rather have JSN than a guy like Keenan Allen. So, I mean, this could be a crazy take looking back on it, but I'm just not a big fan of Keenan Allen in 2024. Number 7 for overdrafted, and I think maybe just a flat-out bust this year, is Zamir White. ADP is number 68 overall. And it's not that I hate Zamir White, the running back. I feel like he's fine, but I also feel like we've seen this movie plenty of times where the starting running back on a team leaves, and then the backup guy is given this big opportunity, and people are like, oh, he's going to get so much volume this year, 20 touches a game, and then it just doesn't work out. And we've seen this now with, it was Mike Davis with Atlanta. I think this was 2021. And then Cordell Patterson, of course, came in and took all the carries, and he was the better back. And then last year, I had Alexander Mattison on my bust list, and that worked out perfectly because he was not good. So Mattison last year, Mike Davis a few years prior. It feels like Zamir White's going to be that next name on the list of just guy that gets a lot of opportunities, but it's just not that great. And if he was on a team like the Ravens or something like that, I can see buying into Zamir White, but being this bruising back, an early down back, a 2-down back on a bad team like the Raiders, it just doesn't feel like it's going to work out. The touchdown upside's not going to be there. He doesn't have the breakaway speed. He doesn't have a great receiving profile. I just don't see the appeal. I really think it's going to be a wasted pick at the end of the day. If he's like your RB2 and you get him in like the 8th or 9th round, then like, okay, maybe it's worth taking a shot on. But if you have to take White in like the 6th or 7th round, it's just not worth it. There's other better players in the area. So I would just rather not do that. So I think unless the Raiders magically have a better season than we all expect, this pick's probably not going to work out. So I would avoid Zamir White. Number 8 on this list for me is Austin Eckler, ADP 91 overall. And I know I'm hating on the old Chargers players, Keenan and now Eckler, even Mike Williams. I'm not a big fan of him this year on the Jets. But Austin Eckler is just not doing it for me. I hate saying it because he's been a great fantasy player for a few years now, but I feel like his best days are behind him. He's now 29 years old. Everybody talks about that run he had versus the Packers where it looked like he was running in slow motion, but it's more than that. I just think he's diminished as a player talent-wise, and I just don't think he has the same explosiveness he used to. And it seems like there's a true 50-50 split between him and Brian Robinson. I actually like Robinson a good amount this year. And Robinson's also their goal line back based on what we've seen in preseason. So for Eckler, it's almost like you're getting a guy who may get some early down carries here and there. And Jaden Daniels is not going to be this check down quarterback. I don't see that being the case. For Austin Eckler, he's had the luxury of playing with Phillip Rivers and Justin Herbert for his whole career, guys that are mainly pocket passers, especially Rivers. And now it's like, oh, it's Jaden Daniels, a guy who, if there is a check down situation, maybe he'll just run instead of checking it down. So I don't think Eckler's going to have that PPR upside that he used to have in getting all those catches. I think now this is a different situation. It's going to be tougher. He's not the same talent that he used to be. And I feel like taking him is going to be a waste. I really would take a shot on a younger player with more upside because I don't really see the upside case for Austin Eckler. Unless Brian Robinson got hurt and Washington is like this elite offense, which maybe they are. I just don't see that being the case. I think mainly it's going to be Daniels and McLaurin and Brian Robinson. But, you know, I could see a world where I'm wrong about this, but I just do not see the upside at all with Austin Eckler this year. Number 9 for me is Jordan Addison, ADP 99 overall. I mean, this is a pretty obvious one. It's not just the off-field stuff that, of course, is an instant red flag, but last season, he averaged a touchdown on every 7 catches. I just don't think that touchdown rate is sustainable. And Minnesota, of course, has a downgrade with their quarterback situation. And another big way that Addison benefited last year, which hopefully does not happen again this year, is that his splits with and without Justin Jefferson on the field were pretty drastic. So with Jefferson on the field, he averaged 5.5 targets and 45 yards per game. Without Jefferson, that bumped up 2 receptions to 7.5. He bumped up a reception and a half to 5 receptions per game and 68.7 yards. So basically 23 more yards per game and a reception and a half more per game without Jefferson on the field. And I think Jefferson's going to have a big year. I know Sam Darnold being there is like not ideal, but For fantasy purposes, I think Jefferson's going to have a monster year once again, a bounce back year for sure. I don't think Addison's going to benefit the same way he did last year. I feel like Kirk Cousins was a great quarterback for Addison. I don't see Darnold being that great for him. And unless he maintains this ridiculous touchdown efficiency, which does not seem sustainable, I think Jordan Addison's going to disappoint this year. And there also is a chance, of course, based on his off-field stuff, that he could be suspended as well. Now time for the sleepers and undervalued players that are past ADP 100, so outside the top 100. Jaden Daniels was exactly 100, so obviously he's a sleeper / undervalued player for me. I think by now, or probably when you're watching this, his ADP will surpass the top 100, but number one officially for me is going to be Caleb Williams, the man who went one pick above Jaden Daniels in the real draft. I think Caleb is worth taking a shot on, because why the hell not? He probably has the best supporting cast for any first overall pick that I could remember, and he just has the upside you want this late in the draft. It's not crazy late, but enough where it's worth taking a chance on. He has some rushing upside. I'd rather have him than a guy like a Goff or a Tua. I know Goff has like a couple very easy matchups to open up the year, so if you're very focused on winning like weeks 1 and 2, then fine, take Goff, but definitely over Tua. And we saw in preseason, Caleb is a special player. Once again, just like I said with Jaden Daniels, he may not hit the ground running and be like Pat Mahomes right off the bat, but I think just based on like his fantasy numbers, he's going to put up very solid stats for your fantasy team. So, I don't know what that means for the Bears win total wise and whatnot, but you have the receivers, you have a pretty improved offensive line and a new play caller now for the Bears, and it's like, this is a good player to take a shot on. This is a guy who people labeled as a generational talent, so why not take a chance on it? Number 2 for me with the ADP of 107 is Jackson Smith-Njigba, the wide receiver for the Seattle Seahawks. His rookie year was somewhat of a waste. He had that hand/wrist injury right before the year started, so he kind of started the year behind the 8 ball, and Metcalf and Lockett were ahead of him, of course. And I think this year he should be ahead of Tyler Lockett, who I think at this point, he may be okay and have a couple games where he's fine, but I think Lockett, for the most part, is a little past his prime in terms of being a useful fantasy football player. The Seahawks have a new offensive coordinator, of course, Ryan Grubb. He had a top 10 passing offense in college for the past 3 years, and JSN's an immense talent. People that evaluated wide receivers, of course, and even Chris Olave and Garrett Wilson both said this, that JSN was the better wide receiver at Ohio State. Even Brian Hartline, he was the wide receiver coach for Ohio State. He still might be, but he even said that JSN was the most talented out of those 3 players, and we know Olave and Garrett Wilson are top 20 picks. So getting JSN this late is pretty crazy. I get that it's not the best situation because Metcalf is there. You have Lockett, who might be a pain, but I think JSN is the second best receiver on this team now. He's just 22 years old. The situation at quarterback is fine. I think Geno is fine. Almost said Sam Hartman. What the hell's the guy's name that was on Washington? I forget his name now. Sam Howell. There it is. So Sam Howell's the backup just in case something happens to Geno. So, JSN, I love taking a chance on. Like, the upside's very high. If something were to happen to Metcalf, I mean, we're talking about a guy who could be like a top 20 wide receiver, so definitely take a chance on him with this ADP of 107. Number 3 is Trey Benson, running back of the Arizona Cardinals, a rookie, ADP's 109 overall. And I'll admit, his first preseason game was trash. He looked hesitant and didn't know what he was doing. The second one looked better. He was 9 carries for 43 yards, had a big run taken away by a holding call, but he showed that those really good cuts and explosiveness that he did in college at Florida State. And coming out of the draft, I was a big fan of Trey Benson, or coming into the draft, I should say. I kind of wanted my Giants to take him, and the Cardinals was a pretty good fit for him because he is behind James Conner, who's 29. He misses games every year. He was on the IR for 4 games last year. The Cardinals took him in the 3rd round. I'm sure guys like Emari Demercado and Michael Carter, or one of those guys, will be the 3rd down back if and when James Conner goes down, but he should be Arizona's early down back. And look, I'm not a big fan of James Conner this year at that age and that injury history. There is a chance, of course, that James Conner is just not going to be that guy. And especially by the end of the year, because the Cardinals probably won't be a playoff team. I'd be a bit surprised if they were, but they should have a good offense. But playoff, in terms of competing, I don't see it happening. So by the end of the year, we may see a situation where the Cardinals want to get a good look at Trey Benson and kind of sit down Trey Benson at the end of the year, kind of like what the Chargers did with Keenan Allen last year, where if they were in playoff contention, I'm sure Allen could have played through his injury, but they just shut him down because, why not? But they'll probably get a good look at Benson at some point this year, whether it's due to an injury to Conner or because it's towards the end of the year, you're in your fantasy playoffs, and this could be a guy that pops off for you. He's explosive, can break off big runs, he's a pretty capable receiver. So I like Trey Benson. I'm not going to say he has like league-winning upside because, once again, I don't see him being the third down back. But can he be like a low-end RB2 who's reliable and gets volume and can score some touchdowns and get a couple catches every week and kind of do what James Conner does? I mean, yeah, I don't see why not. The number 4 sleeper for me is Chase Brown, running back of the Cincinnati Bengals. ADP is 110. I'm not a believer in Zach Moss. He did some nice things last year. He really surprised me last year. But yeah, I'm just not buying it. They signed him to a 2-year contract in the offseason, but this has Zeke and Pollard written all over it, where Moss is going to be the Zeke and Brown will be the Pollard. The more explosive back who the fantasy community really wants to play more, but the Bengals may look at things like pass protection and shit like that, and they may say, no, we got to play Zach Moss more and things like that. So that may piss us off, but if Zach Moss were to get injured or just isn't that effective, you have a guy in Chase Brown who could be a breakout running back, a guy who plays on a good offense. The Bengals have a better offensive line than they used to. It's not saying much, but the final 6 games of last year, Joe Mixon, of course, on the way out, they started playing Chase Brown more. He had some really big explosive plays. He had that long screen touchdown versus the Colts where he outran everybody, and it's like, whoa, that guy's pretty damn explosive. He's 5'9", 212, so pretty solid size, and he could handle a large workload. He had 355 total touches his senior year at Illinois, so the guy can handle a big workload if needed. The concern is pass protecting for Joe Burrow, which of course Bengals coaches will want that to definitely be a positive in his game, and sometimes taking the tough yards rather than bouncing everything, so his vision can definitely be improved, which I do believe it's getting better. If he ends up even getting like 60% of the workload with a healthy Burrow and a Bengals offense that's clicking, this could be a huge return on your investment, so I would take a shot on Chase Brown if he's sitting there late, especially if you went wide receiver heavy early. You're looking for a running back who can break out in these later rounds, and Chase Brown can be one of those guys. Number 5 with an ADP of 116, and if you watch this entire video, this is no surprise, but I have Blake Corm, the backup running back for the Los Angeles Rams. You heard my first busts or first overdrafted player was Kiron Williams. So for me to have Blake Corm, it definitely makes sense. I've liked Corm for a while. The Rams invested a 3rd-round pick to get him, and I think he's arguably the best handcuff in fantasy this year. I said this earlier. And as I said, Rams running backs are very valuable when they are given the shot to be the guy. More times than not, they end up being very valuable. It's harder to think of a Rams running back that was given an opportunity and it didn't work out. I feel like the entire list is Cam Akers, and that's it. It's the entire time that Sean McVay's been there, which I think has been since 2017. So, you had Gurley, of course, who had his great years, CJ Anderson, Darrell Henderson, who else? Kiron Williams last year. So, you have a bunch of guys rotating that end up being big fantasy contributors. And Sean McVay really likes Blake Corm. Sean McVay once said, Blake Corm really stood out, mature beyond his years. I love the way he handles himself. I love even more how when there's been a couple things that don't go the way he wanted, how he responded the next play. He's taking notes on the sideline during the preseason. Like, he's fully invested. Seems like a really mature guy who's taking his career seriously, which of course is like somewhat somewhat important, I would say, for fantasy football. You want to look into those things. He is 20 pounds heavier than Kiron. He's more durable, as I said before, and the college production was really good at Michigan. I know Michigan had the great offensive line. It made his life easier, but the Rams' situation for running backs is very good as well, so it won't be that much of a difference. So Blake Corm, I think, might be the top handcuff in fantasy this year. Number 6 with an ADP of 123 is Jaguars wide receiver. I am definitely not going to say Gabe Davis. It's Brian Thomas Jr. And when I made my video of draft prospects I love before the draft, so this is before I knew where he was going to go, I had Brian Thomas on that list. He was, I think, the first guy I mentioned. I was a big fan of his game at LSU. He lands in Jacksonville, which I wasn't ecstatic about, but after the preseason clips and what I've heard from training camp, the hype is really getting loud for Brian Thomas Jr., and obviously I love the talent, but it feels like the opportunity is going to be there as well, which is a big part of fantasy. So I don't think Gabe Davis is that good. Christian Kirk is like the inside/slot guy who may only play on 3 down or 3 wide receiver sets. I'm sure he'll be in there on some 2s, but you get the point. Brian Thomas should be, and pretty much every down player who's going to be on the outside and make a bunch of big plays for this team. He should have a big opportunity with I think Trevor Lawrence is a good quarterback. I know last year it didn't go too well. It took a big step back from 2022. But I think Trevor Lawrence and this offense will bounce back, and Brian Thomas could be a big piece of it. He's listed at 6'3" and ran a 4.33 40. He can make big plays downfield, adjusted the ball very well, high points the ball very well. Brian Thomas Jr. may be a steal in this draft for anyone drafting for fantasy, so definitely love taking him late in the draft if you're wide receiver needy. Number 7 is J.K. Dobbins, ADP 131. I'm going to fall for this again. I remember it was 2 years ago. If you go back 2 years and watch my videos, I was hyping up J.K. Dobbins. I think that was the year. Maybe it was 21, actually. The year he tore his ACL in preseason. That really sucked. I remember I drafted him that year in round 2. And a few days later in preseason, he tore his ACL. So a reminder, don't draft until preseason's over, or at least try not to. But anyway, for this draft cost, I know coming off an ACL and an Achilles injury last year now, the odds of him panning out are pretty slim. But at a cost like this, I just can't give up on J.K. Dobbins just yet. And last year, it looked like that could be the year things were working out. He had a good first half. And then, of course, right before halftime, he snaps his Achilles and the season's over. But he worked his way back. He's a full participant now. He's playing with the Chargers, a new team that wants to run the ball and have this run-the-ball identity. And I think J.K. Dobbins might be the best back on this team. I'm not a big fan of Gus Edwards. He's like just a guy. He does things coaches like, but at the end of the day, he's not going to be like a big difference maker. Kamani Vidal, maybe towards the end of the year, a rookie, he might, do something for this team if somebody gets hurt, whether it's Gus or JK or both. But Dobbins is so good when he plays. His career yards per carry is 5.8. I mean, that's ridiculous. And he's still just 25 years old. So I'm giving him one more shot. If he doesn't do it this year or gets hurt again, then okay, I give up on J.K. Dobbins. But for 2024, I'm giving this guy one more shot to be a late round running back you can take who maybe will start for the Chargers. Number 8 with an ADP of 133 is Khalil Shakir, wide receiver of the Buffalo Bills. This ADP does not make sense to me. You're getting a guy who might lead a Josh Allen-led team in targets at wide receiver 52. It just doesn't make sense. I know Shakir's not the most talented wide receiver in the world, but he's a guy who Allen trusts. He has a very high catch percentage, not many drops. The coaches like him, and he finished off 2023 playing at a pretty high level. He has reliable hands, and the explosive plays could be there. He had that 81-yard touchdown versus the Jets, which was an insane throw by Josh Allen, which pretty much made the entire play. But Shakir still had to weave through the defense and outrun some guys. He also had that insane touchdown versus the Steelers in the playoffs where he caught the underneath pass on a drag, and Minkah Fitzpatrick was trying to wrap him up. He ducks under the tackle, runs through like 4 or 5 Steelers, and gets a touchdown. So, I think Shakir is pretty talented for the most part, and getting the opportunity he has. I heard today that Curtis Samuel is battling turf toe, which is like even better for Shakir's value. I'm not the biggest Keon Coleman guy, at least not yet. I mean, he can't really separate, and I have my concerns. Marquez Valdez-Scantling does not scare me, and I think Shakir already has his role carved out. So I'm taking my shot. Khalil Shakir, he's going much later than he should, in my opinion. He could lead this Bills team in receptions, and you're getting that very late in the draft. Number 9 is Rico Dowdle, ADP 137. Of course, the Cowboys have a weird running back situation. You have 29-year-old Ezekiel Elliott, who is supposed to be the starter right now. He had that 1 year in New England where he actually looked okay, but after these two guys, it's just a bunch of dudes. It's like Royce Freeman and Deuce Vaughn, so I'm really not that concerned about who's behind them. And 2023 was really the only year where Dowdle got real playing time. He's been with Dallas in 2020, 2022, and 23. I forget where he was in 21, honestly, but whatever. Didn't play. But for 2023, he had 89 carries, a career high, 4.1 yards per attempt, which, is okay. Could have been better. But Zeke at this point in his career is nothing special. He'll give the Cowboys coaches what they want, a great pass protector, a great goal line back. But if they want a running back with some juice, Rico Dowdle could be their guy. And I still think that the Cowboys are a candidate to sign a back or trade for a back before the year starts. I don't know why Khalil Herbert or Rashaad Johnson, whichever Bears back they're not going to use, because they have Swift as well. I don't know why one of those guys just doesn't get traded to Dallas. That makes the most sense in my opinion, but maybe that'll happen. I don't know. Dowdle has a 3-down back size. He's 5'11", 215. I think he's hungry for this opportunity. He's never had this type of workload before projected for him, so I'm sure he's excited about that. And he's a decent receiver, and he plays on one of the better offenses in football. The Cowboys may take a step back this year, but it's still a good offense for the most part. And, at this price, if you go receiver heavy once again and you're looking for that late round running back who could be a guy who pays off in a big way, once again, Chase Brown goes a little earlier, but him, and now you have Rico Dowdle, who could make an impact from day one. So I think Rico's a fine guy to take a shot on. Zeke will probably be a pain in the ass for the most part, but Dowdle may split 50-50 and have a pretty decent role on this team. Number 10 is Ty Chandler, ADP 149. I'm not even the biggest Ty Chandler fan. He had his chance last year, and he looked okay at times. Sometimes he looked great, sometimes he looked awful. But the only person ahead of him on the Vikings depth chart is 29-year-old Aaron Jones, who over the summer I was talking myself into, but since then I'm like, what are the chances it really works out? Like, maybe it does, but I don't know. But Aaron Jones missed 6 games last year with a hamstring and an MCL injury. So 2 separate injuries, lower leg or lower body injuries. And Chandler did run for 4.5 yards per carry last year on a career-high 102 carries, and he also had some starting experience last year. He had a game versus Cincinnati late in the year where he had 23 carries for 132 yards and a touchdown on the ground. Also had 3 catches for 25 yards. So he's had his games before. He's not awful, as I said, but he's not somebody that really impressed me. But if the often injured Aaron Jones, who turns 30 in December, gets hurt again, then you're looking at a guy in Chandler who could have this backfield pretty much all to himself. So at an ADP of 149, where the only thing standing in his way is an older Aaron Jones, I think that's worth taking a shot on the back of your bench. Number 11 for me, with an ADP of 150, is Joshua Palmer, wide receiver of the Chargers. I'll be honest, I think Palmer's a very average NFL wide receiver, but this is by far the best opportunity of his entire career. It may be of his entire career. So I believe at this ADP, this late in the draft, it's worth taking a chance, right? Mike Williams being gone benefits him the most. That was always a misconception of when Keenan Allen got hurt, people would pick up Joshua Palmer and be like, oh, this is, a great pickup. It's going to work out. But Joshua Palmer was always more comfortable playing that X-receiver position that Mike Williams played. So now that Williams is gone, which he was gone most of last year having torn his ACL, but now he has a full opportunity to be like the X-receiver and be the guy on the outside for this team. And his competition for targets is a rookie, Ladd McConkey in round 2, DJ Chark, and Quentin Johnston. Yikes, that guy stinks. Anyway, in 5 games where Palmer saw at least 70% of snaps last year, this is what he averaged per game. 6.8 targets, 4.2 receptions, and 86 yards. Very solid. He had that knee strain last year in the middle of the season when he missed 6 games, but somebody has to catch the ball on this team, and I feel like Joshua Palmer is a fine receiver. He's had his games before. He has decent size. He makes good plays downfield. So I'm like, you know what? For this late in the draft, why the hell not? Maybe this works out. Maybe he's the number one target for Justin Herbert, and you end up finding a great value late in the draft. Number 12 is Jaleel McLaughlin, ADP of 164, running back for the Denver Broncos. The Broncos have a lot of running backs right now, but I fully expect Samaje Perine to be cut very soon. And I don't want to say hopefully that happens because you don't want to wish unemployment on somebody, but it'd be nice for Jaleel McLaughlin's case. Devonte Williams has played up his value recently, but it's not like you're drafting McLaughlin to handle 15 to 20 carries a game. So obviously Williams being there is fine. And Sean Payton's always had success with this archetype of player. Going back to Alvin Kamara, Darren Sproles, Reggie Bush, Pierre Thomas, some other receiving back in New Orleans. There's a bunch of guys. So the Broncos now have a great check down quarterback, a guy who loves throwing to running backs in Bo Nix. And Bucky Irving last year at Oregon, who was the running back for Bo Nix, had 56 receptions, which is a ton for college. So I really love this role that Jaleel McLaughlin has on this team and this offense with this quarterback. And Denver's not expected to be a great team. They should be playing from behind. There should be a lot of garbage time checkdowns. So I love McLaughlin for full PPR, especially. If you're in a standard league, maybe it's not worth taking a shot on, but any point per reception league, it's probably a good idea to take McLaughlin late in the draft. He's also a good player. He was third in elusive rating last year, according to PFF, only behind Devon Achane and Jaylen Warren. He was 15th in breakaway percentage out of 63 players ranked. So the guy's a good football player. He's a little undersized, of course, but as I said earlier, we've seen this type of player in a Sean Payton offense do very good for fantasy or very well for fantasy before. Maybe McLaughlin could be that next guy. Number 13, ADP 167, and this will not be a surprise if you watch all my videos, but Will Levis is on this list. Recently made a video about him, my last video, and I talked about him from a real-life NFL standpoint, but I think for fantasy football, he has what it takes to be a really good option and possibly a low-end quarterback one by the time the year's over. He's big, he could run, although he hasn't run as much as he used to, which hopefully he gets back to that. He throws the deep ball as often as anybody. He's entering year 2, has a new play caller on offense, a new head coach, and the Titans upgraded around him. So he has a lot of things going his way, and I think outside of Justin Fields, who I know may not be the starter, Will Levis is my favorite late-round quarterback dart throw because you know what everybody else is in that area, right? You know what you're getting from Matt Stafford. You know what you're getting from whoever, some old, like Kirk Cousins. Those guys are probably fine, but they're not like the mystery box. I'm looking for the mystery box this late in drafts, right? So there's a chance that Will Levis just breaks out this year and is great. And as I said, you'd wish he ran a bit more, but he really has not ran much since 2021, his second to last year in college. He had 376 rushing yards that year, but really has not ran much since. So with Derrick Henry gone now, he can definitely call his own number at the goal line more. Maybe he has a handful of rushing touchdowns. The passing efficiency probably should improve. And as I said, he could end up being a low-end cornerback or quarterback one. So if you're late in the draft, and whether it's a one quarterback league or even a two especially, just throw Will Levis on the bench. Maybe he breaks out right away and you're like, oh, wow, I have this guy on my bench. This is awesome. So it could work out. Maybe it doesn't. If not, you could just drop him and try to find somebody else. Next at number 14 overall, pretty low pick here, number 201. Wow, so Braylon Allen, running back for the Jets. He's a rookie 4th-round pick, and the Jets love this kid. And if Breece Hall were to, God forbid, get injured, which I really hope not because I like him a lot this year, there's a chance that Braylon Allen becomes the Jets' 3-down back and could be a league winner. Now, at Wisconsin, he averaged a career 5.9 yards per carry, and he's looked very good in preseason thus far. And in the preseason, he's had 14 carries for 81 yards, had 2 receptions as well, had this really nice catch on the sideline from Tyrod Taylor versus Washington. And he is 5'11", 235, so he has that great build. He's also the youngest player in the league. He will not be able to legally have a drink of alcohol until January. He will be 20 the entire year, which is freaking insane. So very young. If you're in a dynasty league, of course, take a chance. But from what I've seen, he can definitely hold up in pass protection, which is critical for protecting Aaron Rodgers. The Jets did take another back in round 5, Isaiah Davis out of South Dakota State, but Allen is the superior talent in my opinion, so I'm not that worried about him. And as I said, if something were to happen to Breece Hall, which once again I hope not, but this is real life and stuff happens, Allen's worth a stash. If you have a big bench and you can stash guys, this is a really nice handcuff to have. Braylon Allen, pick number 201 overall. The last guy on our sleeper list, Darnell Mooney, ADP 204. This was an under-the-radar free agency signing by the Falcons, and Mooney had a good amount of hype a couple of years ago. He had a 1,000-yard, 81-catch season back in 2021. The past 2 years have not gone his way. I'm sure the Bears acquiring DJ Moore did not help. The quarterback position in Chicago did not help. And he also had some small injuries. So he's still 26 years old. He will have the opportunity to break out for a second time and kind of have a career resurgence. He'll more than likely be the Falcons wide receiver 2, maybe wide receiver 3 if you consider Kyle Pitts to be the second option. Maybe you do. But Kirk Cousins, this offense, it should be a useful player. He's going to play like that Jordan Addison role. It's a different offense, of course, but think about it. Like, you had Jefferson, who is obviously better than Drake London, but that's still the alpha wide receiver 1. And then TJ Hawkinson and Kyle Pitts are somewhat comparable. So it's kind of a similar setup. And then you have the guy playing the Addison role. Of course, Addison was crazy efficient last year, had a lot of touchdowns, but Darnell Mooney's going to be in that role. So in 8 games last year, before Kirk Cousins got hurt, Addison was on pace for a very similar season that Mooney had in 2021, minus the touchdowns, obviously, but he was on pace, Addison, for 76 catches and 1,024 yards and 15 touchdowns. So that's not going to happen, of course, but there is a chance that Mooney can see around 60, 70 catches, flirt with 1,000 yards, have a handful of touchdowns, and for somebody going this late in the draft, it's going to be a steal. Like, I'm not going to say he's going to be like a must-start type of player, but a guy who in the right matchups and when you know the Falcons are playing in a high-scoring game, you can throw him out there and maybe he catches a 60-yard bomb and can win you your week. So I know Zach Robinson is not the same as Kevin O'Connell, but there will be games where Mooney goes off, and I think there's a reason to take a shot on that. So anyway, that's going to do it for the video. This might be a long one by the time I finish editing, but hope you guys enjoyed, of course. If you want that video of me debating about the polarizing players, let me know in the comments. I might do a bold predictions video as well. So if you want those, let me know. Hope you all enjoyed, and I'll talk to you guys next time.